Okay, welcome. Hi, everybody. This is a session on academic standing issues. What are my options? It's brought to you by all of the students' unions at Toronto Metropolitan University and the Ombudsperson's office and the Office of Student Life and Learning Support. So we'll introduce ourselves. Next, I'll pass it over to Hector first, and we'll just go down the list.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hector Flores, and I'm the Student Issues and Advocacy Coordinator for the TMSU, Toronto Metropolitan Students Union. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and I hope that there are many questions that can be resolved in this session.
Great. And my name is Lyndall Musselman, and my pronouns are she and her. And I am the Student Rights Coordinator for Toronto Metropolitan Association of Part-Time Students, as well as for the TMGSU, the Graduate Students Union at the university. And I'll pass it over to Maureen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maureen. I'm the Ombudsperson at Toronto Metropolitan University, and Gemma Kerr is the Assistant Ombudsperson. For those of you who may not know what an ombudsperson is, because it's not really intuitive from the name, really it's someone who tries to help people resolve conflicts. So in this case, what we try and do in our office is help you, the student, resolve whatever conflict you may have with the university that you haven't been able to resolve yourself. So hopefully you won't need to contact us throughout the year, but if you do, we're here to help.
Thank you. And then I'll just explain that we unfortunately do not have Joelle Navarro with us today. They're the Student Retention and Transition Facilitator from the Office of Student Life and Learning Support. They oversee and kind of coordinate the Fresh Start program, but I will cover that content in today's presentation. We'll move along. Maybe also I'll just say, if you do have any questions for those of you joining us live, know that you can use the question and answer, the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll get back to you with an answer as soon as we can. And you can also ask questions anonymously that way. Okay, so this slide just is meant to take a moment, reflect, and think about what the land and whose land you're on at this time. So Toronto and TMU are in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that brought them, that bound them to share the land and the territory and protect the land. And subsequent Indigenous nations, peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And I'm also going to put just quickly here a link to a neat website where you can look up which territory you're in currently. I'm going to put it in the chat here for everyone. And it's just nativeland.ca. And you can look up where you are anywhere in the world, actually. Sorry, I have the wrong link that I pasted in there. Just one moment. There. Okay, finally. All right, so on with the show. So I'm going to cover some of the general points about the university's academic standings. First, we're going to focus on undergraduate academic standings. So all students begin their programs with clear academic standing, and you should know that kind of the minimum across the board to graduate is a cumulative grade point average of 1.67. Some programs have variations on that and different expectations. And it might be something like needing to achieve a 63% instead of the kind of more baseline normal 50% in order to pass the course. And then other programs also have specific rules around standing variations in order to meet the specific standards for that program. More on this to come in the next slides. So again, everyone begins with a clear academic standing. And then if there are concerns with not meeting some of the benchmarks or standards for your program, you would fall into academic probation. So that's just a bit of a red flag, the university trying to tell you that you just need to maybe focus and specialize a bit more on an area where you're struggling. And there will be a probationary contract set out for you from your program that you should read over, make sure you understand very clearly, ask questions to usually it's a program administrator or academic advisor, student affairs coordinator or something like that, that would be the point person from your program to share that contract with you and answer any questions you might have. And just know that you should sign off on your probationary contract as soon as possible. So since this is the first week of classes, you should really do that this week if at all possible, so that you can get into your courses and move forward in a timely way and not get behind. And then there is the academic standing of required to withdraw, commonly known as RTW. We'll talk more about this one. There's a number of options for RTW students, so we'll get to more on that soon. And then standing variation withdrawn, SVW, that would only apply to those of you who might be in the School of Accounting and Finance, SAF, I believe the acronym is. And technically, it, in a way, should apply to, I think, nursing students as well. But it is the majority of cases of students who fall into SVW are from the School of Accounting and Finance in particular. And then finally, there is the sort of terminal academic standing of permanently program withdrawn, or PPW, for undergraduate students that have maybe already been required to withdraw and are reinstated back into the program, and then again fall into concerns around their grade point average or academic performance. You can fall into being PPW, or if you've failed a required course a third and final time, or in some other programs that you only have 2 attempts at certain required courses. So that can, if you fail twice in some scenarios, for example, in nursing, you can fall into being permanently program withdrawn as well. And that's when you're not able to return or continue in your program. And we'll talk more about options available if you're PPW as well. Okay, so for graduate students, they also begin with a clear standing. And then if they're similarly not meeting expectations, not meeting the required grade point average, or have any issues such as failing courses, it will cause them to fall into a provisional academic standing, which is basically like a probationary academic standing, where they would be asked to meet with their program representative or their supervisor to go over a provisional plan and basically sign off it in the same way. It's treated like a contract. And you're supposed to sign on that in order to move forward to continue in your program. And again, you want to also be very cognizant and aware of the criteria in your provisional plan, so you know what goals you need to meet in order to get back to a clear standing or to just continue in your program. And then there is the more terminal academic standing for graduate students called Withdrawn, which is where you were maybe not able to meet the requirements from a provisional plan, or you had a second failure or unsatisfactory UNS on a progress report that would cause you to become withdrawn from your program. Okay, so more on being required to withdraw. Then again, this is back to undergraduate academic standing in a summary. So basically for RTW, it's basically for those students who have a CGPA of less than 1, except for those of you that had just finished your first ever semester at the university, or if you have a term GPA below 1.67 while on a probationary contract, or there was another violation of a probationary contract, and it could include not meeting the criteria or failure to even negotiate or sign off on your probationary contract in the first place. So in a sense, you could be going from probationary right to RTW if you just failed to sign off on your probationary contract, is what the policy says. Also, I should let you know, all of this is spelled out and comes from Senate Policy 170A for undergraduate students. I put a link in the chat to that for those of you that might want to read over the language there. And so here are some of the options available to those of you that are required to withdraw. So number one, what would happen automatically if you took no action at this time is that you would be out of your program for a full year. So 12 months away from your program. The intent is that you're supposed to reflect and think about, is this the right program for you? How can I improve going forward? And just know that you will have the ability to apply for reinstatement for fall 2024 or later, actually. And the deadline for reinstatement for fall 2024 is August 1st, 2024. And so in the application for reinstatement, you're encouraged to kind of talk about how you're going to be successful when you do take that time away from your program. You could take college level courses to try to enhance your skill set and maybe try to keep up and stay fresh with your focus. Or if you already know like a weak point that you have in your program, it might be good to take college level courses. However, you need to know that they will not be able to count towards your program here at TMU in any way. But you can also work, can be employed, maybe ideally somewhere that's relevant to your program. And you could talk about that in your application for reinstatement to come back to your program. But just know that it's not guaranteed. It's like applying, like asking to return for reinstatement. So option 2 is about just thinking, is this the right program? Maybe you could transfer. You could look into, in a sense, doing another program at TMU that might be more suited to your skill sets, your strengths, and would be aligned with what you want to do career-wise, right? So the thing is, TMU doesn't have like an internal transfer mechanism really. So you should consult with the admissions office of the university about which other program you're interested in. Like if you're still doing research, thinking about that other maybe similar type program, consult with the experts at the admissions office is what we recommend. And just know that there is a way to, like in case you are eligible for the Fresh Start program, there's a way to transfer within Fresh Start. I'll get to that more when we talk about Fresh Start though. And then the third option for students that are required to withdraw is that you can think about appealing. You could file an appeal around a grade that you've received. You can also appeal being required to withdraw. And Hector will talk more about that shortly. And then the fourth option is the Fresh Start program. This is where I would normally pass it over to someone else. I'm just going to take a moment and have a little sip of my beverage here. Okay, so on to the Fresh Start program. You have to be RTW in order to participate. However, not everybody who is RTW will have eligibility to be approved into the Fresh Start program. So you should just look online to see what the minimum GPA is required for the Fresh Start program based on whatever home program you're coming from. They tend to have different kind of qualifications. And I will find the link and put it in the chat shortly. It's also what's listed here on the slide, but I'll put it so it's something clickable for you shortly in the chat. Anyways, but basically with Fresh Start, you do have to sit out one semester. So for those of you that are just RTW at the end of spring, summer, you would sit out this fall term, and then you could start in the Fresh Start program if you're eligible and get accepted starting January. And again, I'll put that link, make it more accessible to you in the chat when I get a little moment. You should know that the deadline to apply for Fresh Start is December 1st for starting in January in the winter semester of 2024. In Fresh Start, you will enroll in 2 credit courses plus CIFS 100, which is the Fresh Start course. That's what you take in your first semester. And then in your second semester in Fresh Start, you would be taking up to maximum of 4 credit courses from your program. So that's good, right? Like that you can, in a sense, get back on track, working towards achieving those course requirements for your program. And then by successfully completing Fresh Start, you will be guaranteed to return to your program. You will be reinstated back into your program. This is one of the best things about this particular program. It's a safe, like helpful way to help you return and reflect on some of the like maybe barriers that were holding you back previously. It's meant to be a really supportive means to get back on track. Okay, so here is a visual representation of the student life cycle of Fresh Start. So, okay, enrolled in the university. If you receive the RTW, so just note that this slide is a little misleading. We noticed this when Gemma was presenting this information last week, because you're not RTW like only by having a CGPA of less than 1. That's not totally accurate. However, you're RTW for whichever specific reason. So you take a semester off, and then you move on to probation or clear, and then so this EAP 1 and EAP 2. So that is the technical like registrar kind of phrase for the Fresh Start program. And you need to just achieve some of these TGPAs and CGPA. And then, as I mentioned from the previous slide, you will take an EAP 1. You do the non-credit, it's just a pass or fail Fresh Start course plus the 2 credits. And then in the second term, so EAP, it's extended academic probation. That's what EAP stands for, by the way. 2 is where you can do up to the 4 credits. And here's another visual representation of the Fresh Start program. So some stages of student growth. So in the Fresh Start course, I believe you're focusing in weeks 1 and 2 on self-discovery, setting some goals, developing that growth mindset, and really importantly, you normalize failure. Sometimes that happens, and it's a way to really learn and think about what went wrong, how to improve going forward, like how you can kind of unpack maybe some of the gaps that exist and do better going ahead. And then weeks 3 to 5, the self-development. stage. And so talking about strengths, learning more tools and strategies, being aware of the resources on campus and who your champions are. And then finally, the last couple of weeks are about self-empowerment, becoming the best version of yourself, reflecting on goals, and setting new goals for the future. Okay, and then, so this is just a slide on like what are the benefits. So number one, you can resume your studies after 1 semesters instead of a whole year of having to sit out of studies. Number two, you will feel a sense of belonging and community. So you will be connected with someone who will be leading the Fresh Start program, as well as like a group of other students that you can connect with. You can join online meetups and accountability groups to help stay on track and encourage each other. Number four, it's an inclusive one-on-one advising, mentorship, and support kind of system. And then number five, you will build confidence and gain a sense of self-empowerment. So this last slide is basically just a little piece of feedback from a student who did the Fresh Start program in the past. They say, after taking the Fresh Start Strategies course, I learned that it was much more than that. The course offered more guidance than I had expected. It was less about learning about certain topics and more about equipping myself with success tools and learning strategies that would benefit me during my student journey. So it's nice. That's really nice. Okay, so that's it on the Fresh Start program. Oh, I saw that there was a question. Maybe it's about the Fresh Start program. It's about being RTW. Okay, so I'm going to answer this one live. So basically, the question from the anonymous attendee is, do you know how being RTW this semester and joining the Fresh Start program reflects OSAP? Good question. It's equivalent to being part-time and like enrolled part-time. So you should still be eligible for some OSAP, but follow up with folks at the service hub, or you can email freshstart@torontomu.ca to get that in writing to get more information. But basically, I do recall from prior presentations we've done, and it's basically like part-time enrollment status. So you can still get some, I believe, OSAP, just not the full amount that you might have got when you were in full-time studies. So just something to be aware of. Okie dokie. And on to appeals. Over to you, Hector.
Thank you. So as you can see, all the students have the opportunity to appeal final grades for a course and your academic standing. It is very important to mention that you would have to file one appeal for each grade that you want to be reviewed or changed, in addition to the academic standing if that applies to your specific situation. So there is no limit as to the number of appeals that you could be filing. Of course, you would be filing one or multiple grade appeals and one standing appeal. You can only appeal your standing once. In order to have this opportunity of appealing, you need to meet the definition of one or more of 4 main grounds for appeal. The grounds for appeal are extenuating circumstances, and I will be touching briefly on each one of these so that you know what they involve. So extenuating circumstances would be when the student believes that there have been occurrences of significance or reasonable significance that are outside of the student's immediate control, could not have been reasonably foreseen or avoided, and significantly impact the student's ability to fulfill their academic requirements. This is by far the most common ground for appeal that we see. And generally speaking, extenuating circumstances can be divided in 2 categories. One would be health issues, and the other one would be called compassionate issues. Health issues are, of course, when you are having physical and mental health difficulties that are sudden and acute, and that, as I said before in the definition, can affect your academic performance. On the compassionate side of things, you can have different events that can cause undue hardship or personal distress. And some examples could be the death of a close relative or friend, or a serious injury of a close relative or friend, traumatic experiences such as being a victim of a crime or witnessing a violent crime, or something that could be distracting and emotionally stressful for you when you are complying with your graded components. The sudden loss of income, so financial issues could be also a valid compassionate grounds. One that we see a lot is an increase of unplanned caregiving responsibilities to members of immediate family. So once again, when a close relative gets sick and needs your full attention, and that distracts you from your academic obligations, that could be a valid ground for appeal. Participation in university events or in conferences, competitions, or field trips, and of course, legal commitments when you are compelled to attend court. So as you can see, there are sort of different reasons why you could be filing an appeal based on extenuating circumstances. The next ground for appeal would be prejudice, and this relates to any situation where the student feels that they are being discriminated on a ground protected under the Ontario Human Rights Code. Some of those grounds would be age, race, citizenship, place of origin. There is a full catalog of around 16 different discrimination grounds. One very important is disability. So whenever there is the belief that you are being discriminated on any of those grounds, you can base your appeal on prejudice. Procedural error is when the student believes that there have been errors in the procedures that are followed in the application of policy. And finally, course management cases that are when the student believes that the final grade was adversely affected because an instructor or supervisor deviated significantly from the course management policies. For example, from the course outline, or that there is one common ground that is not quite at the level of prejudice, but where the student feels that there is a personal bias. Of course, that would be difficult to prove, but at the end of the day, you have the possibility of raising an appeal with grounds in course management if you feel that the professor has some bias or is not treating you fairly. Essentially, those would be the four grounds for appeal that you have to meet. And Linda, if we can turn to the next slide, please. Talking about standing appeals, these are available for those of you who are required to withdraw or RTW, permanent program withdrawn, which is PPW, or withdrawn in case of graduate students. If you file a standing appeal, it is very important for you to take into consideration that you have the right to continue to be enrolled in courses for the relevant term on a temporary probation or provisional contract until the appeal is decided. In that regard, it is also important to let you know that there are 3 different levels of appeal. So you could continue to be taking courses and enrolled in courses while any of these appeals are under examination. Of course, there is one risk. If you decide to continue to be enrolled and to take courses, in addition to the fact that you would have to be complying with all your academic requirements and all the graded components of the courses, so you would have to participate in labs, in you would have to deliver all the assignments in time, and in general, you would have to continue your studies as if you didn't have the RTW or PPW or withdrawn standing. One difficulty is that you may be dropped from those courses if your appeal is denied. So you would be dropped from the courses, and you would have an opportunity to receive a refund of your tuition. But some students find it inconvenient to go through the whole process to be dropped at the middle of the semester. So that's something that you should be taking into consideration. Our recommendation generally is to file both grade and standing appeals. And of course, whenever you're thinking about filing a standing appeal, it is advisable to contact your program administrator or advisor so that you can be enrolled for that term, because sometimes the system does not allow automatic enrollment because your status would appear to be RTW, PPW, or withdrawn. So if you're having any problem enrolling into courses, and if you decide that you want to continue to be enrolled in courses, you could get in contact with your program advisor to have a manual enrollment. Can we go to the next slide, Linda, please? Now, if it is not so easy to file an appeal. As I was saying before, you have to meet at least one of the grounds for appeal that I commented on before. But it can also be challenging if you did not take action to try to resolve the issue when it arose. So, for example, if you were facing some health issue, but you did not go to a doctor, you did not communicate to your professor, you did not raise any issue within your program, even with your program chair or director, it will be difficult for you to explain that situation. It is possible, of course, but it will make your case a little less persuasive. We always recommend you to be proactive rather than reactive, and to seek an informal resolution in due time rather than waiting until you get a final grade that is adverse and you start fighting that grade, claiming that you suffered extenuating circumstances that nobody knew about. So it is very important to keep in continuous communication with your professors and with the program chair, because the lack of communication could jeopardize your possibilities of success in a further appeal. Another point that is very relevant is that you need supporting documentation to have a strong appeal. So it's not only necessary to have a strong argument meeting the definition of one of the grounds of appeal, but you need to support your argument with evidence. There is almost no limitation as to the kind of evidence that you could be relying upon. However, you should bear in mind that different pieces of evidence can have different weight on the decision. At the end of the day, these cases are resolved on what we call a balance of probabilities. So the simple question to respond is whether it is more likely than not that you met the ground for appeal. And of course, the stronger the documents that you file, the stronger the possibilities of success. A final consideration, and perhaps the most important one, is that there is a deadline. There is a general deadline to file grade and standing appeal of 10 business days from the date in which you receive the final grade or the change of standing. But generally speaking, there is a deadline for the spring-summer 2023 term to file this kind of appeals that will expire next Thursday, September 7 at 4 p.m. Even though there is nothing in policy saying or justifying the 4 p.m. portions, I always advise students to file even before that 4 p.m. deadline. Number one, because if you have any kind of technical difficulties, you would still be able to speak with someone at the Senate to try to remedy the technical difficulty. The second one is, of course, that there can be system overloads. You can have technical difficulties on your end. You can have be facing all sorts of situations that could prevent you from filing your appeal on time, and you wouldn't want to miss the deadline and have to ask for special permission to file a late appeal. So it is always easier to program yourself to file your appeals. Yes, it can be on September 7th, but don't wait until 4 p.m. necessarily. In very extreme situations, you could contact the Senate to see if they would be allowing you to file your appeal after 4 p.m. But once again, it is not a recommended practice. The recommended practice is that you prepare with due anticipation and that you can meet the deadline without difficulty. So that would be all that I have on appeals, and I would turn it now to Linda or to Maureen. I don't know if Linda wants to introduce Maureen.
Hi, I'm Maureen Helt. I'm the Ombudsperson at Toronto Metropolitan University. Thanks, Hector. I think you covered that very well. Our office, the Office of the Ombudsperson, is an independent office. That means we are independent from the university, although we operate within the university, and our office is located next to the Student Campus Center in Oakham House. So virtually in the same building that the student unions are in. We're just in the older half of the building. And when I say that we're independent, it means that the ombudsperson, myself, and the assistant ombudsperson, we are not employees of the university. We're employees of a third-party not-for-profit organization that provides a lot of various student services to TMU students. So we're financially and structurally independent from TMU, which really allows us to truly be impartial, and we basically advocate for anything to do with fairness at TMU. So if a student has a concern with respect to their professor, an academic issue, in the context of what we're talking about today, academic appeals, you can certainly come to our office. Quite often, we direct students to the various student advocates, either Lyndall or Hector. But there are often instances when students come to us with respect to an appeal issue, and there might be other issues associated with it as well that we might identify and be able to assist in that regard as well. And we also do work with the student advocates in helping students in terms of making sure that they are, they have everything they need in terms of preparing their appeal and feeling comfortable throughout the appeal process. The three pillars of our office is that we're confidential. Anything that you say to us is completely confidential. We don't talk to anybody unless we have your explicit consent to do so. We have a case management system where we keep track of all of the emails that come into us on a particular matter for a particular student. But the only people with access to that case management system are myself and Gemma. We aren't subject to freedom of information requests, and the university can't compel us to disclose information. So we are completely confidential. As I noted previously, we're also impartial, and we're structurally and financially independent from the university. Next slide, please, Lyndall. So our work with students in appeals is really looking at fairness. Everything we do is really focused around fairness. So what we want to make sure is that procedural fairness is provided to students where decisions are made with respect to a student. So if a student appeals a decision and that decision is released, we look at whether or not the policies and processes that were utilized in reaching that decision were followed. So it relates to the steps taken by the decision maker before and after deciding or responding to a complaint. So there could be many aspects to that. And I believe they're set out in the next slide. So what our office looks for to ensure procedural fairness, and these are really just very basic but very key components that as a student, you have the right to present your case based on any one of the grounds that Hector just explained to you. So if there are extenuating circumstances, if there's a course management issue, prejudice, or any other procedural error, you as a student have the right to set that out in writing to the decision maker. You have to be provided with an opportunity to be heard, and that is usually an opportunity to be heard in written form. But sometimes, it might be if there is an actual oral hearing. But it's key that you have the opportunity to present your case and for it to be heard. The decision maker must be impartial. So sometimes students have concerns that the decision maker may be a professor who they have had interactions with in the past. They may be concerned that that individual professor or decision maker may have some sort of bias against the student. And so if that's the case, it's really important that you raise those issues with either the student advocates or with our office. Or if it comes to be that we look at the decision, if you feel that you weren't treated fairly, and we look at the decision and some of the comments made in the actual decision, if it may show that there may have been some bias within the decision for whatever reason, that's also worth, that you raise that with us, with our office, and or with the student advocates to discuss. And the other key thing is that you have the right to for reasons for your decision. Sorry, Lyndall, it was just on the previous slide, the last point. So you are, you are allowed to request sufficient reasons for your decision. So if your decision simply says, we deny your appeal on the basis that the student hasn't made out any of the grounds of appeal, that's not sufficient. The decision maker has to say why it doesn't meet an extenuating circumstance, why there hasn't been a breach of the course management policy. Whatever grounds that you set out, the decision maker has to explain how they linked whatever reasons that they have to the decision that they reached. There has to be a connection between the two. So if you feel that your decision was one which is just a paragraph and doesn't adequately address the grounds that you set out, then you should raise that with one of our respective offices to look into that, to see whether or not you were given adequate reasons, and if you want to appeal it to the next level on the basis of insufficient reasons. Next slide. So again, with the fairness concerns, other than the right to be heard, the right to present your case, the adequacy of reasons, and an unbiased decision maker, we also are very concerned about making sure the policy and procedure is properly followed. Now, sometimes it may be that we think the policy itself isn't fair, and that is something that we can discuss with you as well. But essentially, the university has an obligation, and the decision makers and all units of the decision making system at the university have to follow the policies and procedures that are in place. And sometimes there's room for a little bit of discretion in there, and sometimes there isn't. But we will want to make sure that everything was followed in accordance with policy and procedure. Next slide, Lyndall. So sometimes we find with policies that there isn't sufficient clarity on a situation a student has experienced. So sometimes a policy might, and this is true with all policies, they might cover a very broad number of situations, but your situation might be different enough that we think that the policy lacks clarity. So when I said that there might be room for some discretion earlier, that's what I meant, that if it doesn't exactly fit within the policy, then that in itself may be a ground to say, no, this shouldn't be treated in this same category because it's not explicit and it's not clear in the policy. Policies need to be clear. And sometimes the university might argue, well, this is how we always decide these things. That's a difficult case for the university to make out because most of the decisions, if not all of the decisions, are they are not public. So sometimes there may be a statement made that this is how the university has always dealt with it, but it's not clear that that is truly the case. Sometimes it's clear from the decision that the decision maker hasn't really considered all of the information available to them. So we've had instances where a decision has been issued, but it fails to reflect a good part of a student's submission. And it turns out now it doesn't happen often, but it does happen that maybe the decision maker wasn't provided all of the submissions or all of the associated documents, like the supporting documents that the student has submitted. And that is a technical error that occurs sometimes when the material is filed. It doesn't always make it to the decision maker. Now, again, that's not often the case, but it can be the case. And sometimes it's clear the decision maker hasn't really read all of the information. So that's also a concern because they are obligated to read all of the information. It doesn't mean that they have to set it all out in their decision. But if it's very clear that there's a key point that hasn't been considered, that's another ground for potential procedural error. And again, the last point is really what I've already talked about, concerns that a decision doesn't set out sufficient reasons for the decision. So those are all the types of things that our office looks at in terms of fairness. And as I said, we work quite closely with student advocates with respect to student appeals. But we also look at what some of the other issues may be with respect to policies and the sufficiency of policies and the clarity of policies and that sort of thing. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Okay, so just a few resources that all students should be aware of and utilize if they'd like to. So the Center for Student Development and Counseling, or CSDC, some people call it in terms of the short form. So this is where students can get in touch with counselors and have an appointment. So like a one-on-one session with a counselor. Unfortunately, there is usually a bit of a wait list, but if you're interested, especially if you're feeling a bit lost, even if you are withdrawn currently from your program, you are eligible for at least one session before you are maybe no longer a student at TMU. Or even if you are in a withdrawn or PPW or RTW situation, you can have a meeting to talk about your options or your path, like what might be next. And so then also the student care office, that is a particular resource for students facing complex issues, circumstances where students might need to kind of be triaged with being connected with maybe financial aid or also counseling. That in that way they can help kind of expedite connecting students with those very helpful point people. So you can be in touch with them through that email. And then finally, Good to Talk. So this is a free confidential counseling support line for any post-secondary school students. It's that 1866 number you see on this slide. So if you feel overwhelmed or you're in crisis, just know that there's someone you can talk to. Okay, and then on to our contact information. So here's our emails. We've chosen to kind of primarily share our email addresses because I know some of us really prefer that means of communication. I, for one, tend to work the majority of the time remotely, so I'm not in my on-campus office all that often to pick up a call to my phone extension. And if you do call me, then I'll have to check it. And then anyway, there's usually a bit of a delay if you leave a voicemail message, but email, I can respond usually the same day or as soon as I can. And then there's a record of our exchange in writing, which is always nice. Email is pretty great. Email's your friend. But yeah, there's the email for the Ombudsperson's office, as well as the Fresh Start email that I mentioned earlier. If you have questions about the Fresh Start program, get in touch there. And then also some of us have online booking systems. Hector and I think both do. We can put the links in the chat, though. If it's about appeals, like I'm not sure if it's going to be possible at this stage to get a meeting with either of us, just given that it's a little bit busy. So email might actually be the best in terms of just maybe trying to ask questions and getting responses from us that way, or just be in touch and we'll see what we can do. Okay, and then, oh yeah, we are moving on to our discussion. So here's basically a little summary or different things that you might want to talk to us about or ask questions about. And then finally, thank you for joining us. This is basically the end of the sort of more formal slides presentation part of our session. So thanks for joining. I'm gonna end the recording now, and then I can grant folks the ability to speak if you'd like to and ask a question. If you want, we'll just see how that goes. So stopping recording now. Thank you, everybody on the recording. Take care.